You're doing now?
Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to
Up a bit.
UCL.
Up a bit.
It's fine. It's not.
I know.
There's no voice
I
left.
was joking.
Welcome to UCL room 603. Have I got that right?
603, yeah.
The Management Education Suite. And hello to those people who are watching live on YouTube. So we're streaming these talks. So the way this afternoon is going to work, don't be confused with the fact that I'm holding a handheld and there's nothing coming out the PA here. It's actually for the live stream. And grateful thanks to Shaw for providing our wireless microphones this afternoon. So the way it's going to work is we're going to have a couple of presentations in here in room 603. Then we're going to take a coffee break just out to where we were milling. And then we will then move into the workshop session with Matt North. Matt North has got a couple of sessions in there. So we'll have an hour in there with two really interesting workshops. After that, which I think would be about 4:30, 5 o'clock, we'll be moving upstairs to the academic common room for drinks reception. Following that, we will then move over to Westfield for this evening's meal, which will be at the Turkish restaurant Lokma. So the one thing just to say about our meal there this evening is everything's table service, including drinks. So just grab yourself a seat and we'll be waited on hand and foot, which will be very nice. There'll be beers out on the tables and that when we arrive as well. So main thing is just it's table service, and we've got both floors. We've got the whole restaurant tonight. So fantastic. I think that pretty much covers everything I need to say about housekeeping. So we've got two sessions, 2 half-hour talks in here this afternoon, which are being presented by a couple of staff members from UCL who are hosting this half of LTSMG24. So we're going to begin with a talk from Sheila Egan, who I'm sure a lot of you know very well. Sheila is AV Design Principal here at UCL and is going to talk to us about the AV design user journeys here in this building. So Sheila, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. Institution, which is kind of user journeys, user scoping, user requirements, call it what you will, but how we approach that and what we do. I'm going to look at some hopefully interesting examples from UCL East, where the process went really well, went less well, and just some of my kind of favourite spaces as well. So yeah, hopefully it'll be interesting, and it might be telling you things that you already know, or we can have questions at the end to see if you agree or have a different process yourself. So this is an older slide. As you can see, the big monolith that we're currently sitting in isn't here yet, but I've left it up there because it kind of represents me personally. It represents my kind of journey, my user journey, I guess, with working at UCL and on UCL East. I've kept it in. I kind of, I started at UCL in September 2019, and then I followed through on a pre-planned move to East London in December 2019. So I live kind of here. I can never quite decide if it's a blessing or a curse that I'm kind of a 20-minute train ride, a 40-minute walk, or a 15-minute cycle if the weather's really good and I'm feeling active. But I think mostly it's a blessing, because days like today remind me of why this is such an amazing project. So a clear steer, having some conversations with people about this actually already, which is interesting. But a clear steer that I received from mine and Ketan's director when I started right from the outset was that the ISD relationship with the States had become a little bit fractious, and UCL East represented a really great opportunity to kind of build bridges, to figure out how we work together better. And also, you know, no pressure, but basically it was such a big investment for UCL, it could not fail, it just couldn't fail. So fortunately, I was working with one of our amazing ISD PMs who kind of looks after all the cabling and network and just getting the project in the right place, a guy called Reece Edgell. And we were blessed because we had a really amazing UCL East project team. So Helen Fisher, Catherine Fletcher, And we've got an amazing, very decisive vice provost called Professor Paola Letteri. I don't know how she does all the things that she does, because she's also Professor of Chemical Engineering here. And yeah, we had some really amazing, decisive people to work with, and also our director, Lloyd, as I said. And then latterly, Rob Webb, who's the UCL East ISD director, who you're going to hear from tomorrow morning. Yeah, one of the key things about the UCL East campus is that the idea of it is that we're getting different courses together, and they're going to kind of create courses for the future and courses for now. We only had about, I think, 5 courses actually move over from Bloomsbury. Other than that, it was all new courses. And the whole kind of ethos of the building is, as you go through, there's different collaboration spaces and different departments, engineering, architecture, things like that will get together and kind of create new courses. But it's quite a different approach as a Russell Group university. So a big key thing was the kind of shared facilities. I'm going to talk about the wet lab and the dry lab, but that was a really key thing. It's very new for UCL to have shared facilities. Usually the different faculties don't share. So I've just put up this slide. It's a very high level slide, but it just shows what our kind of delivery process is. So I was lucky when I joined UCL, we actually already had a team of designers. So our kind of process is, I now insist that we meet with end users at the start, end users, main building occupiers. Sometimes it's quite difficult to get to the end users, but I'll try and be quite tenacious about the whole thing. And then I'll write up a high level AV narrative to ensure that I know what we're kind of trying to achieve with the AV systems. We then hopefully get CAD designs for the building and rooms we're working on, definitely plans, RCPs if we're lucky. We might be able to get ceiling heights if we're really lucky, and occasionally elevations if our luck's truly in. So we use these to try and inform our AV&E designs, because one of the things I think is really key, people talk about future-proofing a lot, and I actually think if you've got network in the right places, if you've got floor boxes in the right places, you can pretty much do anything after that. If you don't have any of that, particularly UCL East is all poured concrete walls, so we had to get all the containment into the walls and stuff really, really early. So then we do the AV&E designs, plan, RCP, elevation, try and do a cable schedule somewhere in there so that you know what you're pulling through the containment you've got in. And then I'll update the AV narrative with greater detail. I'll list any compromises we've had to make in the design and then reissue that to the AV end users. So yeah, as I joined UCL, we were kind of straight into M&E design for both Paul Street and Marshgate. Next slide. Yeah, so I'm just going to share some ideas I have. You guys are probably familiar with all of these, but I think it's always worth repeating. So get the right end users in the room. We quite often end up talking to heads of school that don't actually teach. And I've got a good example of where that kind of went a bit wrong, but we got it right in the end here. Have some key questions and ideas, because that's always helpful. People find it a bit easier if you present them with options. People usually find it a bit easier to comment on them, whereas if it's just a blank screen, it can be quite difficult. Listen, it's always a good one. It's quite difficult to do. I'm really terrible for sort of going for techie solutions without actually listening to the requirement, but I think it's really important to think what is the function that this person really, really needs. Sorry, just scrolling down. Yeah, we get a lot of people that consider themselves to be kind of early adopters of new technology and stuff like that. And I try, and one of the key things that I'll talk you through that I learned from Paul Street is try and get an idea of who are the main people that are going to be using the space. If you're early adopter, your person that's asking for bells and whistles is only going to use the space 5% of the time, and 95% of the time it's their colleagues that just want to get in and teach or get in and have a meeting. Just design it for the 95% of the people. It will save you lots of service calls. And I think the other thing, sometimes I find, I don't know if this is just the UCL thing, but sometimes we're a bit scared to say, it won't do this. We can't fit this into your budget. We can't fit that in. That won't work with that. But I think it's much better to have those conversations up front and say, we've managed to get 80% of your requirement in there. This strange thing with camera tracking that you wanted for $5,000, we can't get that in there. But we've added some additional functionality and you could plug it in at a later date if you get funding or something changes. So I think it's really important to say it's not gonna be there. It's not gonna work. Do it up front, and it will save you bother later on. And I think when you're talking to end users, I'm sure you all know this, but don't get carried away with the technology. They don't really care if it's a Crestron box or an Extron box. They just want to know that they're going to come in, plug in a laptop, and it's going to work. And get agreement in writing. I kind of now judge the success of my projects by how many times I had to resend a AV narrative. I only have 3 on the 2 buildings, so I kind of think that's quite good. And just some sort of higher level tips as well that we think about. We're really used to looking at plans. We get RCPs, we get elevations, we have an idea of how big the windows are, how tall the ceiling is. Our end users don't. They've got no idea. It doesn't mean anything to them. So I think approaching people with empathy, trying to help them on that journey can be really, really helpful. If you think you've got a similar space elsewhere, take them to it, let them walk around, let them think about where everything is. Because I think sometimes that's where people come up with impractical solutions. They don't understand that they're impractical, but when they actually kind of walk around the space, they realise it. I think as well, be aware of the bigger picture at your institution. If there's stuff that's going to change in the next couple of years, build in a bit of flexibility. If your institution's thinking about going from a Teams room to Zoom rooms, buy something that you can change the firmware and do that, because people get really cross if you've wasted their money. We have a lot of departmental spends at UCL. People get really cross if it then doesn't work a couple of years later. And then it's your problem, or Ketan's problem, mostly. And just consider what else is in the building. I don't know about you guys, but UCL sometimes does things by floors instead of by building. So sometimes we'll have end users that go into a really old room that's a department space with like a push-button Crestron from 2005. And then they're going into one of our new kind of whizzy spaces, and the kind of cognitive load of moving between those 2 spaces to teach can be quite a lot. So it's worth thinking about the surrounding spaces as well. And again, I've just put it on there again. Don't be afraid to say what you can't deliver. If it's not going to do it, just tell them up front. They'll be okay with it. Or they'll come back to you when they've decided what they really want to do with the space. Sorry, my mouse buttons. 1 second. So just moving on to being a bit more building specific and some of the spaces that we've got. I've got no idea what time we started now, Ketan, so hopefully I'm with time. So UCL East Paul Street, we've got over 200 ensuite rooms. It was mainly about the residencies. We really need to expand our residencies. 9 bedrooms per flat, tiny bedrooms like this, like a galley, but they have these really big kind of kitchen dining spaces. The kind of shared spaces are really big, really nice. We've got 1 cinema space, and it is actually a cinema space. It's got 35mm analog projectors in it, and most of my kit's kind of somewhere else. 3 major custom designed lab style spaces, Slade, Art Studio, Urban Memory Lab, Nature Smart, and different kind of Paul Street. So Paul Street opened a year before Marshgate. It got quite badly hit, as did Marshgate, with some of the COVID delays. So we had to kind of change out video switches, DSPs, and that we're still sort of suffering the consequences of that. One of the things I learned from Paul Street opening a year earlier would have been think about the functions that are going to be available in Marshgate, because all the people in Paul Street are still going to need those functions for the 9 months. So one of the things that I probably would have done was, in one of our large classroom spaces, I would have added an extra camera so you could have big meetings. For example, with the biggest meeting room there is about 4 to 6 people. So yeah, I would have just thought, oh, okay, yeah, think about the wider campus picture. The cinema, as I mentioned, it's a really interesting space. It's huge. It's one of the biggest spaces here. The cinema was almost designed for 1 end user in our media anthropology department. And there was a lot of negotiation with that. I had to negotiate just to get our projector in a projection room, which seems a bit sad. And I think with hindsight, I actually would have argued a little bit better to have more say in the systems that went in, because as it turned out, it's being used for events far more than it's ever being used as a cinema. So I would have asked questions like, how many times a year is this really going to be used as an analog cinema? And how much of the time is it actually just going to be used for teaching? Because I think those answers would have been easily 95% teaching and events, 5% cinema. Yeah, I would have thought a bit more. Obviously, it was kind of through that COVID period, but obviously the events now, there's a greater request for hybrid. So we've recently added hybrid equipment into the cinema. I've got a kind of camera that faces the audience and stuff. So yeah, I would have pushed for power to all the seats as well, because that I think was just overlooked for whatever reason. So yeah, I think with hindsight, I probably would have had some more difficult conversations. But there we go. You live and learn. It's still a fabulous space and people love using it for events. Sorry, my mouse is going funny. Okay. So moving on to Marshgate, I tried to find a beautiful table with all the spaces, but it was all in my head, so I just wrote it down, to be honest. We've got 32 teaching spaces, 2 shared teaching lab spaces, 9 kind of standard meeting rooms, it might be 10, 3 large boardroom style spaces, 19 what the architects called BT, I would have called them BYOD, kind of 3-person meeting spaces, 9 departmental spaces, and about 11 digital signage screens. So it was, I was referring to it as the monster, wasn't I, all the way through. So yeah, it was a really, really huge project. Probably the biggest I think we've done here, and certainly the biggest investment for UCL. So a couple of things that I learned along the way with some spaces. Sorry for this horrible slide, but it's a good demo of it. So this has got a horrible red bar through it because I came in one day and the exact space where we was going to put one of my nice little neat lecterns that you can move out had this enormous podium in it. So I'd seen it on some drawings. I hadn't really asked. It never appeared, so I wasn't too worried about it. And I came in and this enormous, non-accessible 1975 style sit there and I'll declaim at you kind of lectern was in place. Yeah, so I think in the end we had to get our contractor. It was meant to be like a movable pod. It was not a movable pod. So yeah, I think we had to take it apart and just stick it somewhere eventually. And nobody has ever asked for it. Nobody's ever asked for there to be a hideous pod there. So yeah, I think my advice there would be keep an eye on drawings and building models, and a bit like seeing something dodgy on the tube. If you see something and it doesn't look right, go and ask people. Be really tenacious about asking people because you might come in and get a hideous surprise. Fortunately, she says with her mouse not wanting to work, we did end up with a really amazing space. So we got rid of the podium. We've got a nice little neat lecture space, and you'll be there tomorrow, so you can have a really nice look around with it. But we added some. At the end of the project, we added some advanced hybrid functionality. So we've got 3 array mics, we've got some basic camera tracking, and we've got 2 cameras in there. So it's ended up a really nice space, and we're actually getting a lot of requests to book it out for conferences and stuff that we say no to. With hindsight, I'd have added a bit more tracking. I've probably have added something by QSC to do real good audience tracking and stuff like that. But yeah, it's ended up with a bit of a good space. So yeah, on to kind of some of our more challenging spaces. A few of you looked at the wet lab design space. So originally the wet lab had a screen between every 2 students, and talking about kind of plans not really making very much sense to people. The academics didn't really understand what they'd signed off. So they came in and they started being able to have a look around the building in about June kind of time. Well, the month before that, and they were just like, we don't want to look out onto a sea of screens. Actually, we'd quite like to see our students. We'd quite like to engage with our students, which is a good thing. So yeah, this is my terrible picture that I was a bit embarrassed to share, but I basically did an options paper back to our UCL East board with kind of like screens at each end of the bench or screens back to back high in the ceiling. We went for the screens back to back high in the ceiling eventually. So I'll just show you the current picture. So yeah, we ended up with screens back to back, kept the screen at the front, kept the zoned voice reinforcement audio all through the space. The systems ended up a lot simpler. We put in little, they wanted each bench to function independently. So we put in some little blue streams, I think. It was whatever we could get hold of at this point in the project, to be perfectly honest, that would auto switch from each end of the bench. It's ended up being a much simpler system. It was going to be a full kind of AV over IP, encoder decoders. We've got a lot of Crestron encoder decoders if anyone needs them. Probably sell them to you for a quite reasonable price. But the end users are really happy with this space. It's a lot simpler than we ever planned it to be. The end users are really happy. The lab manager's really happy. So yeah, it just shows once you get people into a space. I think the lab manager even did like cardboard cutouts of how all the screens would look and stuff like that, and they were just no. So yeah, I think that's a really nice example of an end user journey once they occupied the space. Lab 500, not quite as successful yet. So Lab 500, again, keep an eye on the architects, because the architects moved this door to here, moved my projection screen across, and then all of a sudden the benches that were here really couldn't see very much at all. So it's been a bit of a work in progress, Lab 500. The voice reinforcement, again, zoned voice reinforcement so that you can use the different benches to teach different groups or at different ends. That works fine. The lab manager's happy with that. But yeah, the projection less so. So I'm going to show you the current picture. So I didn't add this with trailing cables, but fair play, my lab manager needed a screen at the end of each thing. So he's kind of pulled out HDMIs, run them in containment, run really long HDMI cables, and wonders why it doesn't work sometimes. But yeah, we're coming back to this space in the summer and adding screens at the back of it, kind of coupled together. So yeah, I guess the message here as well is don't be afraid of failure or going back and having to do things. If you've got the time and the budget, it's great. And I think as well, the lab manager wasn't actually working here at the time when we designed the space. So obviously he's come in, he was quite annoyed by everything. He started talking directly to my programmer at the time as well. I think we all know not to let that happen. But yeah, I think my lessons were don't let your end user interface directly with your programmer. It's always going to go wrong, but you all probably knew that. Lesson 2, try to find a way to get building changes communicated, because that door really was trouble. And overall for the project, one of the kind of key things that I'll come on to is, is about kind of building occupation as well. So we kind of wanted to get most of the big set of teaching spaces done quickly, but actually we had people occupying spaces and wet labs and stuff. So just one of the other lessons that I learned from Marshgate was maybe to think about who's occupying the building and when, and kind of work the spaces around that a bit more. Having said that, we signed off the 32 teaching spaces and I could sleep at night. So I don't know. Yeah, it can go either way. This is almost the last slide for me, I think. So this is just the academic common room where, as Dave said, you'll be a bit later, come up the stairs, go straight up left. But it's just one of my favourite spaces at UCL, which I think UCL East or Marshgate, because yeah, we added kind of pan-acoustic speakers. It's quite a difficult space. It's very bright. For those of you that came on the tour, you'll know you sort of walk past and everyone's like this. But yeah, I think we did a good job of putting in some speakers that sound really amazing, that fill the space nicely, but that kind of don't intrude on the space. And I think sometimes with technology, it can intrude, and we kind of want to avoid that. So that was it for me. I've no idea how long I've been, but have you guys got any questions? How long have I got for questions? I don't know. Yeah? Oh, sorry. I just wanted to, before I take questions, shout out to my amazing colleague, Dan, who did a lot of the sign-offs with me, and Manny, and it's amazing. Everyone was looking at the control panels yesterday, Manny, and your code. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Dan and our colleague, Chris, who did an amazing job signing off the building with us. Yes, exactly.
AV narrative earlier. What does your AV narrative look like?
I can probably show you if you want at the end, but it's basically saying it's got the room numbers, it's got what the scope is. So again, it goes back to my ISD PM to say, no, this was a scope that was agreed, kind of thing, and they change it. But it will basically be a functional user requirement. You want to walk in the space, you want to plug in a laptop, you've got an additional need for a secondary HDMI because you're plugging in a microscope occasionally. So it will have a functional thing, and then it will have an actual kind of what the system will do. So 2 array mics, a little bit of camera tracking, and ceiling speakers. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the AV narrative for this building, I split it into like all our 19-seater rooms, our 30-seater rooms, our dual projection 50s, and then the flat-floored 72 kind of seaters and stuff like that. But it will be functionality in AV terms, and then maybe some pictures of kit if people are really interested. Yeah, exactly. You'd be surprised how powerful that is. But also when they come back and they go, because I think one of the user things that I maybe didn't say is what's really important as well is to get people's assumptions from them. Because the trouble with an assumption is they don't say it out loud because they assume it's there. Light switches are usually the assumption that we trip over. Oh, I assumed that the light switch would be there. Well, no, you didn't ask for it. So yeah, I can show you later if you're really interested. Yeah, it's not the most technical document or anything like that, but it just sets out what you're going to get, what we're going to put in, and then you've got something that if you need to deviate, you can log it as a change and that kind of thing. Hello.
In these projects, a lot of us have got larger projects. principal contractor tends to want to lock in budget very early, which often can lead to the equipment being obsolete when it's completed. What was your approach to that in this project?
So we did effectively. We got the AV-M&E put in under the main contract, and then we procure the AV package. So that's where that design the AV-M&E early, come up with what you're actually doing in the spaces. You can go through that. You can still have a functional requirement without actually picking the kit. Like you can say, we want some array mics, or we want it to be a Teams room, but you can pick the kit later. But we keep that in our procurement space rather than it being under the main contractor. It was partial. So it does get a bit difficult. The main contractor put in the containment. They put in draw-through cables. We didn't have the pulling in of cables in the main contractor package. So we actually employed up the guys that were doing some additional network stuff in the building. We got them to do our cable pulls, and then I got my integrator in to do the rest. It was a 3-stage process, definitely, but that's where like your cable schedules came in. So having your cable schedules early can be quite helpful.
Did you have any issues if there were errors by the principal contractor when it was a different contract? Did you hit any
Yes.
blockers there?
Yeah, we did. When we placed the overall AV procurement for this, I actually paid my integrator for an extra 2 weeks of their project manager coming on site and having a look and flagging any issues so that we could deal with it. So we had PC, and then Mace was still doing bits and pieces in the building. We were very lucky. We got really early PC in March, and then the building wasn't occupied till August-ish for workspaces, and then teaching in September. So we were lucky that we got early PC. But yeah, it was a journey. We sat in lots and lots of meetings with Dawn and the electrical contractor going, no, we really do need a network point at the back there, and we need some, Unistrut to hang to and stuff like that. Yeah, I had to send an email going, we're going to have to go through the acoustic board in all these spaces. And the architects were like, well, you probably shouldn't. And I'm like, well, you haven't said it's going to affect it, so I'm just got to go ahead and do it. Does that answer the question? Any more, or shall I hand over to Ketan? Cool, you're up.
Great, thank you very much, Sheila.
Oh, you're doing the intro. Cool.
Just a little brief changeover between speakers.
So much kit here.
What do you like?
You know it's going to be an exciting presentation when there's loads of kit being brought onto the lectern.
No, that just means I'm incredibly nervous.
So our next presentation is from Ketan Parikh, who is product owner for AV in teaching spaces here at UCL. And we'll just make sure things hook up. Owner for AV in teaching spaces here at UCL. Interesting. We're getting a little bit of. You're not signed into the YouTube on there, are you? And I hate hearing my voice at the best of times. So.
Is it better?
Let's see. Let's put that on you. Great.
Yeah, okay.
Fantastic. Great. Over to you, Ketan.
Thank you very much. Let's make sure my clicker works first. Oh, it doesn't? Does it? Doesn't it? Does it? I will do it manually then. Technology always fails when you want it to work. But let me try it again just to be on the safe side. We'll go without it. Right, my name is Ketan Parikh. I'm the product owner for audiovisual in teaching spaces at UCL. So first things first, a warm welcome to all of you. It's an absolute honor and privilege to have you all in the room today. And if you have any doubts about the sincerity of my statement, let me just remind you, I'm standing here with a clicker that doesn't work. Right? I've got my brand new shirt on. I've tried to dye my hair as little as they are. So this is DEFCON 1, right? So I'm absolutely prepared right now. I joined UCL about 6.5 years ago. And during the 6.5 years, I have tried to lead or manage AV in one form or another. But I've never really stood on a stage like this and done a presentation, because I believe that for anybody to do a presentation in front of an audience like you, they need to have a good story to tell. And I just didn't think we had a good story. Doesn't mean we weren't busy writing one, right? Over the past 6 years, we've been very busy writing the audio-visual story for UCL. We know how it ends, right? We have done about 60% of the journey now. We think we have got a decent first part. So that's what I'm going to present today. And hopefully, with any luck, in 3 years' time, I can present the sequel to you. So in a complex storytelling, movie-making style, I'm going to tell you how it ends. Then we'll do a bit of flashback and then work our way up to present day. So I live in North London, right? And that means I have the fortune or the misfortune of traveling by the tube 3-4 times a week. And normally it's quite a boring, quite a mundane type of commute, except when I'm walking through the station and I see those notice boards up with the quote of the day. And those quotes are amazing, right? They're enlightening, they're refreshing, really nice. So last week I was walking through Euston Square and I saw one of these quotes, and I liked it so much that I thought I'm going to start the presentation today with that quote. So the quote goes something like, "The human brain is an amazing organ. It starts when you wake up and it stops when you get into the office." So if I make a mistake today, you know why. So I was talking about the story, right? So the last chapter, how does it all end? So I think our journey ends when we create teaching spaces which are exciting and which are inspiring for our teachers and students. Spaces that just work. Spaces that are flexible, that allow for different sort of pedagogies to be explored. And this vision statement is very customer-centric, right? There's no talk of AV over IP. We are not talking about AV virtualization or camera tracking, nothing. And I suppose that's because sometimes we get so excited by the new and shiny tech that we sometimes forget why we are doing all of this. So, this sort of statement, so it's quite nice. It reminds you why we are doing what we are doing. But how did it all start? So it started in October 2017, and Paul might remember this, but I walked into UCL for the very first time, and I was faced with a structure that didn't make a lot of sense to me. Right? So we had a central AV team that looked after all the AV centrally. We had an AV team for our medical sciences, right? They looked after those spaces. We had an AV team for Institute of Education. We had an AV team for our laws and humanities department. Then we had an AV design team that Paul Burt used to lead at that point. That design team would absolutely design all the central AV spaces for us. That was good. They might or might not design the medical sciences spaces. Same with IOE, they might or might not do that space. Same with Slash, right? Now, this sort of a model is not unusual for an organization like UCL that has grown organically over the last 198 years, right? Departments have come in, it's gone bigger, it's sort of quite normal. But we had different AV teams for departments, right? We had the central design team that did not own all the designs. The amount of people who drew the strategy was pretty much in double digits. We had some teams that were more future-looking than others, which meant there was always lots of tension around it. And that's not even counting the fact that IT was completely separate from this landscape. So we had a network team that sat outside. We had a desktop team that was sitting on the other side. And then we had our back-end infrastructure team. So think from a project manager perspective. If a project manager has to deliver a building for many departments with many teaching spaces, they're going to have to go and talk to all of these teams individually and try and bring them together. Right? Incredibly inefficient. And in terms of the federated model as well, there are other issues that go with it. So for example, lack of consistency in the user interface. Those are two examples, right? One looks like it was sort of 1980s, one fairly modern, but still not accessible enough. We had different schematics and rack designs depending on who was supporting the space. We had different ways of providing support, right? Each department was doing their own thing when it came to support. We had different standards. So think from a customer perspective, think from a teacher's perspective, right? So we have a teacher in a space giving a lecture. They finish the lecture, walk to the building next door into another space, and they will have a completely different experience. Right? It was not what you would call a unifying UCL experience. If anything, it was just reinforcing that local departmental type thinking. So we had all these issues. What did we do? So in 2019, we said, okay, we need to centralize our AV. But to do that, the only real place where we could centralize it all was a central AV team. However, the central AV team wasn't really the most high-performing team out there. So me and Stephen Ellis, right, both of us got to work, spent pretty much a year trying to figure out, getting the right processes in place, getting good foundations in place, bringing people along the journey with us. And I think it took us about a year, at which point we were like, okay, we are happy with the type of service we are providing. We are proud of the service we are providing. Then the next step was to try and bring AV and IT together. We wanted to blur those lines. We wanted to create the fluid communication channels. Luckily for us, networks, desktop, and central AV sat under the umbrella of customer operations, which is basically headed by my boss, Lloyd Naylor. So we had a bit more of a leeway there. We decided to do a restructure. So we basically blew up all 3 teams and recreated brand new 3 teams. And the teams we created were, first is technical operations team. So this was the largest team. This was a team filled with AV, network, and desktop engineers. Their job is to deal with day-to-day incidents and requests. We had our specialist team. This had audiovisual, desktop, and network specialists. They would look at complex escalations, problem records. They would look at innovation and do some R&D for us. We ended up with a central design and delivery team. Right? They had audiovisual and network designers in there. And their job was to deliver complex capital projects, minor works. They would look at our annual refreshes as well. But all of things used to flow through them. What that also did was it brought AV and IT together. We were able to centralize AV ops, innovation, and design. We could work on some of our design standards. We could start creating the common service model. But we also set up this very, very good communication channel. So our specialists and design teams, they talk to each other all the time in various formats. Our specialists and ops team, again, talk to each other all the time. In fact, they have a formal weekly meeting in place where specialists and ops get together and they discuss various issues. They talk about solutions. They talk about what's coming down the line as well. And we have this ad hoc sort of communication channel between ops and design, because the idea is that ops and design don't really need to talk to each other because everything should flow through design to specialist to ops. So now we had a common service model. We had a common sort of organization structure. We had our common design standards. So what was the next step? Next step is we had to deal with our user interface. I showed you 2 different versions of it. There were many more. We wanted to actually create that unified interface. And to be honest, we wanted to do this a long time ago. Paul Burt will remember, this was back in 2018. We were having conversations about this. Unfortunately, we hit a bit of a roadblock. One of our senior leaders said that he likes the idea, he supports the idea, but he will only say yes if we can promise that we can transition from the old interface to the new interface over a weekend. Exactly, right? Pretty much impossible. But what we did was we still kept working in the background. We had a UX consultant who had worked on gov.uk website come in, designed some frames for us. We sort of designed our UI based on those frames as well. We got them through our digital accessibility team so they can sign it off from an accessibility perspective as well. And then COVID hit us. And that's where we got our opportunity, right? Because that's the point when teaching wasn't happening on campus. That was our chance. But the more we started looking into it, the more we realized that actually there were a lot of underlying issues we had to fix if we wanted to deploy this single interface. We had to fix the fact that we did not have common set of standards across our spaces. The schematics weren't always the same. The input-outputs weren't always the same. So we had to work through all of those things. So this became pretty much like a 2-3 year project. While we were doing this, we also started looking at our underlying code. And one of the things that used to bother us was the fact that we were very vendor specific when it came to our coding. And we wanted to become a bit more vendor agnostic. So we honed in on C# and HTML5. Man is there sitting in the room. He worked incredibly hard with Lucid partnerships over the last 2-3 years to develop this, to get the drivers in place. But we now have a coding system that is pretty much vendor agnostic. Obviously, we standardized the equipment, the rack layouts, and the schematics. But think from the teacher's perspective, right? Now, they can teach in one space, walk into a building next door, into another space. They get the same experience. It's the same interface, the same standards. They get the same support provision. For them, it's a unifying UCL experience. It doesn't feel like it's a local departmental thing anymore. So what are we doing now? we have adopted agile ways of working. We started on that about 3 years ago. And it was quite tough 3 years ago, right? Because we are not software development. AV is quite sequential, it's quite waterfall in its approach. So how do we get behind agile? How do we make that happen? And I think that we had to find a principle that we could latch on to that would allow us to go forward. And I think that principle was customer centricity. Just appreciating the fact that we can take whatever work we are doing and break it into smaller chunks of 3 months and present it to the customer as value. And the customer then has a say. And the customer can tell us, actually, I think you're going in the wrong direction. So we can then course correct effectively. So I think that was quite useful. We latched onto that particular principle, keeping the customer at the center of our journey. And that allowed us to then move forward. And actually, we have made tremendous progress in terms of adopting the agile ways of working. Every quarter, we have a 2-day planning event. Ours literally just happened last week. So last week, Wednesday, Thursday, we all got together. And these events are amazing, right? I mean, we have some very lively discussions, some very passionate discussions. We talk about the past, the present, and the future. We plan out the next 3 months. We have people from states coming in. We'll have people from Moodle and digital education coming in and talking to us. We will just, it's such an amazing event. The buzz is just something else. And I truly look out, I truly look out for those 2 days every quarter, because that's just my chance to engage, not just with the team I have, but also with the wider team as well. Second, closer working with the states. I think Sheila sort of spoke about that in UCL East, right? UCL East was that catalyst. What used to happen was states would go out and do the fabric of the space, and we might not touch the AV. We might go and do the AV in a space, and states might not touch the fabric. The end result, poor perception for the customer, for the teachers and students. They will walk in and AV is not working, or the fabric looks tired. It's not a great experience. So we knew we had to do something. We had to course correct. And that directive to course correct came, thankfully, from the senior leadership in ISD and states. And it was the people like me and Sheila who then carried it forward. My colleague from States, Keel, unfortunately couldn't be here today. She was hoping that she would be. I would have pointed her out. But me and Keel, we have formed a really great collaborative relationship now. And it's not like there's no friction there, right? You get those fictitious sort of situations. But what we tend to do is we tend to find a middle ground. Sometimes I might compromise, sometimes states will compromise. The founding principle, the basic principle that we apply is that it's not about ISD, it's not about states, it's about UCL as a whole. And as long as we keep that principle in mind, I think that relationship is just going to keep on developing and thriving going forward. And then UCL East. I mean, Sheila just did a nice 20-minute presentation, right? You are here today. It's an impressive building, right? I still think it could do with a lick of paint on the exposed concrete, right? But my boss will call me a Philistine for saying that. But it is an impressive building, right? The spaces are impressive. And I know how many sleepless nights Manny and Dan and Chris and Sheila have had to spend, especially because of all the equipment delays we had and everything else. But yeah, no, huge credit to them, to be honest. What else? We are working on creating a culture change. Now, AV support has been about physical person, physically walking through the campus, physically walking into a space, and physically fixing something. Now, from a lecturer perspective, from the time they report the issue to the time it gets fixed, could be 15 minutes, could be 20 minutes. And if you think about it, it's a room full of students who have paid anything from 9,000 to 20,000 pounds per year. But that 20 minutes wasted is just not sustainable. So we need to find a better way of doing this. So in the last 4 weeks, we have started experimenting with a different way of working. What we now have is a remote first rota. So we have some people from our support team who are rotated in to be desk-based. Right? Their job is to look at all the tools we have and try and pick those issues out proactively, try and fix them remotely first. If they can't, then go out to engineers and ask them to go and fix it. But the idea is that we try and fix it before the impact hits the lecturer. To go with that, we are also investigating the use of a single pane of glass, the tool that rules all the tools, right? Because as you all know, in a space, we will have so much technology. Each one will come with its own management suite. So we are trying to figure out if there is something out there that can actually act as a single pane of glass. We think Utology can do the job, so we are currently doing a proof of concept on that. It's sort of going reasonably well. But the tool on its own is not going to achieve anything. You need the culture change to go with it, right? The culture change and the tool set both need to come together for it to really work. And then finally, investigating innovative technologies, right? There's just so much happening in the AV space right now. You've got camera tracking, AV over IP, AV virtualization. People talk about AR, VR, AI, right? We need to figure out what these innovations mean to us. How can we implement them meaningfully within our spaces? So, we do a lot of work around that as well. So where are we? I think we are about 60-65% there now. I think by March 2027, we probably would have realized our vision, or that's what I'm hoping for. But I think we are about 60-65% there. So what happens in the sequel? Well, you will see more work around innovation. I mean, the AV industry is just moving at such a rapid pace right now. What I'm saying now is going to be old news in 3 years' time, right? There will be something new then. So we will continue the innovation piece. We will see more collaboration with the states. If I was to visualize it, I would say, imagine a cartoon building, which is looking really run down, really derelict, and you have 2 cartoon figures with hard hats going in, crash, bang, wall up, 5 minutes later, they come out and the building is all spanking new, right? That's what we want to do. A state and ISD going in together, transforming the building, coming out together. And that's what we are aiming for. We want to continue creating truly interesting spaces. I mean, this UCL East is just a start. I think there's so much more we can do, right? So we want to create more interesting spaces. And finally, do more proactive support. Make sure that our teachers and students, when they're in the classroom, are making the best use of the space. Just make them more productive in the space, right? So be more proactive, be more remote, provide more responsive support. But why are we doing all of this? I mean, I could just easily point you to the slide, we say the last chapter, right? But even that sounds a bit superficial, right? And I was thinking about a bit more of a deeper meaning, because I wanted to sort of end the slide with a bang. So I thought, what is the deeper meaning here? Right? So the way I look at it is, we want to play a very small part in creating an environment that is exciting, that is inspiring for the thought leaders and problem solvers of tomorrow, right? The students from here or from any of our universities are going to go out, right? They might be working on big problems like climate change. They might work on a cure for cancer or dementia, right? They might be leaders in a government, or they might be leaders in a big organization. These are going to be those future thinkers, right? The least we can do for them is to provide them that exciting and that inspiring space where they can learn. And I think that's why we do that. Thank you. Any questions? You got time for questions?
You did it too well.
Ah, there you go then. In which case, thank you very much, everyone.
Say on your slide, the 2 rooms that you showed, I was sitting there going, why is he showing that old room? And then I went, oh, that's because it's the one that we've done up with the stage.
Yeah.
It looks so different. It took me a minute to realise.
Well, thank you both for really insightful presentations about the build at UCL and about your service offerings as well. So we're going to take a coffee break now. Back out in the management suite. After the coffee break, you'll be moving into Matt North section.
Now it works. It's just unbelievable, isn't it?